No mai, haere mai, kia ora no tātou. Welcome everybody to Veracity Lab's webinar on demystifying blockchain. It's great to have a really good team here, and we'll be letting people in just in a fluid way as we progress through the webinar. My name is Brendan Hoare. I'm the Associate Director of Veracity Lab. And I'd like to introduce you to Matthias Galster, who's going to be our air traffic controller and Mr. Zoomster today. And Matthias, this is a recorded session, just so everybody's aware of that, please. So what I was going to do just to start off with is just go through the process we're going to undertake the webinar with, and then just let it flow. So first, this is interactive. We're going to start with 4 to 5 minutes from each of the key presenters. That's Robert, David, Walter, and Chris. You're going to get sort of 4 or 5 minutes to sort of really express themselves to the topic and what the discussion points are in the notice there on the Zoom. So that's what we're going to start off with. And then we were going to give them a chance to ask each other some questions and sort of dive deeper into their presentations amongst themselves. And during this period, please open your chat rooms, because the chat room is going to be our chance to interact with the presenters and each other. And Matthias and I will be looking at the chat and then starting to sort of pick up some questions to present to the panelists or each other, or people may want to contribute also or contest some knowledge which has been presented, other points of view. That's the purpose of today. Also, please raise your hand, like obviously in the reaction button at the bottom there. Raise your hand if you want to speak to everybody and not in the chat room. Or Matthias and I might ask some people to actually present something that they've mentioned in the chat room. Now, I think that's all pretty straightforward. And the idea is we've got sort of 20, 30 engaging themselves and then with each other, and then we'll just really open it up for an open discussion. And as I said to Matthias, if we find ourselves finishing early, that's okay. We don't have to go to 7 o'clock. But first, what I'd like to do is introduce to Kelly Blinko, and Kelly's going to introduce Veracity Lab to us all. Thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome, everyone. I'm Kelly Blinko. I'm a senior lecturer in software engineering at the University of Auckland, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on behalf of the Veracity research team. I'm one of the research aim leads on the Veracity Spearhead project, which is a project that's funded by SIFTI's National Science Challenge. And we're investigating how we can build digital systems that enable trust, truthfulness, and authenticity in all transactions, both in the real world and in the digital or virtual world. So our research is focusing on 3 main use cases. Those are indigenous data, natural products like honey or apples, and artificial intelligence. In the Veracities Lab, one of the goals is to facilitate conversations and enable research and development work in these areas and in values-driven and human-centered technology. And as part of this initiative, we're holding regular webinars to create awareness and to stimulate conversations on topics related to our Veracity work on trust, truthfulness, and authenticity. So obviously, blockchain has been discussed as being very relevant to this topic, and we're going to hear from some leading experts on this tonight. And I'm going to hand it back over to Brendan to kick off tonight's webinar.
Thank you very much. And just before we kick in, I'll just introduce you through the people here this afternoon and evening, some of the team. There's Jens and Richmond, who's on our advisory board. There's Steve Reeves and Tim Miller. We also have, say hello, everybody. There's, and we also have Ben, who's on our advisory board, I think, who's present tonight. So welcome part of the team onto that. So look, I'm not going to hold us up. I'm going to introduce us straight away into Robert O'Brien, who's a distributed system software architect with UMI. And over to you, please, Robert. 5 minutes, I'll let you know.
Okay. Not great. I can speak for a long time about this topic. Blockchains in general, it's something I've been in for quite a while now, since actually before blockchains, before Satoshi actually did his paper. I was spending quite a bit of time looking at some of the work that preceded all of that for a while. So generally, the way I view the technology is as an institutional technology. In fact, I've been quite intentionally avoiding playing around or talking about blockchains in the context of monies, which is where it's often framed at the moment. And this is fairly typical as new technologies gestate and come into the fore. We typically frame them in terms of the old. And this is very much true of the sort of blockchain space. So in many respects, I see digital money, the frame of cryptocurrencies and things like that, as the horseless carriage of our era. Whereas Bitcoin, when Satoshi first did the paper, was sort of described as an electronic payment system. Unfortunately, the money narrative stuck more than anything else. And so there's been very little talk of payments itself. And here by payments, I'm talking about the systems for representing, accounting, and transferring value. Obviously, the framing of blockchains as a ledger or ledger technology changes that somewhat, but the overall narrative is still very much stuck in the idea of digital monies, and we need to sort of escape that quite a bit. We are able to sort of do that now, and this is why, you know, I'm sort of stepping up and talking more in events like this, because we're at a point where the technology can actually be used in different areas that I view it as being really, really important. And so from that point of view, to act broadly in society, we must be acknowledged and certified by third parties. Some of the most fundamental aspects of our daily lives rely on registers or ledgers, whatever you wish to call them. They maintain the sources of truth. And they're also typically in society today pretty expensive to maintain. Most people are talking about the sort of cost of Bitcoin and its proof of work technology, but actually if you consider the legal system, the requirements of banks, all regulations and requirements and all the sort of rules of maintaining various different agencies that in many respects maintain different types of registers, that's actually quite expensive, right? So some of these most fundamental aspects of our daily lives rely on these registers. They may maintain that source of truth for us, and typically it's the government that maintains them. So we've got this vast network of administrators, lawyers, accountants, politicians, many organizations acting in concert to maintain these various different types of records. And in many cases, these records are maintained in a centralized fashion. And often they become the direct target of abuse or being wiped, depending on the circumstances that happen. So for example, one register that was maintained in Afghanistan by the US government to manage biometric information, now all of a sudden becomes an attack vector for the Taliban to attack anyone or find and root out people that help the Americans, right? So there's always dangers in maintaining centralized registers. Now, sometimes that's the most efficient way of doing things and most appropriate things. My identity is managed across numerous registries, starting from before I was even born. Birth certificates, driver's licenses, passports, voting, bank accounts, credit cards, education records, all those sort of things are registries. The very formation of a capitalist society, property rights, and indeed common and public rights rely on registers of some form or another. These registers act as guarantors. They help define and allocate society's values. And broadly, they are society's facts, the social objects, and in particular, the associated processes that help us coordinate and collaborate, right? They help us act when we've got this source of truth. So what Satoshi demonstrated was the ability to maintain these social objects at internet scale, globally, right? Events or the activities that affect these objects are recorded as hashes, okay? Turning what effectively were, turning effectively what were abundant bits easily copied into scarce, trustworthy facts where only the true name really matters. So therefore, the disruptive potential of blockchains relies on extending the sphere of these social objects towards the more porous and intentionally designed representation forms of value that have been too expensive or just not possible to maintain in the past. Blockchains fundamentally expand the concept of value.
Thank you. Excellent, Robert. That was very good. Thank you so much. Just for the other speakers, what I will do is I will hold up my finger like this. If you could see that, that'll be 1 minute. And then if you do go over, I'm going to be doing the big sort of timeout. But we're going to go on to David Ayres. Thank you, David, who's introduced himself as an associate professor in computer science at Otago University and a key member and leader of the research team in Veracity Lab. David, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to start with a sort of 1 minute pitch because I'd pre-prepared this when discussing what the topic's about, and then I'll go into some more detail about why I'm leading with that. So apologies for the circular breathing to begin with. I think we need to stop talking about blockchain, including its use in Web3, and start talking explicitly about the subtypes of blockchain that are environmentally sound and carry manageable risk. For example, permissioned blockchains. I suggest 2 requirements. First, sustainability. Let's call them green blockchains. I don't mind what the term is, but we want those that don't consume vastly more energy, even if it's renewably sourced, than the productivity and economic value of the transactions that they process. Second, contestability. Open, decentralized infrastructure like Bitcoins or like Ethereum's is supposed to have no central control, but that means when things go wrong, there's no route to compensation. You do not want a smart contracts software implementation to stand uncontestable versus contracts represented within a system of law. I'd say that Aotearoa New Zealand has shown itself to be tech savvy in a unique way, but let's try to lead the world back to safety on this one, explicitly focusing on blockchain technology that's both green and contestable. That's the 1 minute pitch, and that's my insurance for getting cut off when I then go and ramble over the rest of the time, but I'll try to unpack some of the points which I'm putting in there. For me, first of all, why am I actually here? How did I end up in this space? I've actually not been someone publishing in the blockchain research. I'm here because we were looking in the Veracity project to develop a high integrity, authenticated, ordered storage of records. But the immediate response we got when talking to people, and Marcus the same as the science leader, was, so you're building a blockchain. I was like, well, I mean, maybe we're not necessarily building a blockchain. And that sort of led us to think, why is it the case that everybody is assuming that we're building a blockchain when we kind of put out some of the technical requirements that we need to have? That led to the kind of digging in and the academic opinions, which may or may not be my actual opinions, that I put forward in that kind of pitch before. I think there's some really key questions that need to come up. Blockchain isn't one type of thing, it's multiple types of things. I think we're going to get to the point of technology maturity where we shouldn't confuse what those types of things are. Permissionless or public or open blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum, those are the ones which at the moment with proof of work have environmental costs, with proof of stake have questionable integrity. But one way or the other, I would argue, and Robert, we can talk about this later in the forum discussion, require a cryptocurrency to actually make them viable. On the other hand, we have permissioned or closed blockchains like IBM's Hyperledger Fabric. These things are much more well-known in technology, which sort of makes them less interesting at some level. But what's wrong with that? I mean, if you're dealing with your kind of business interests and you need to trust this stuff, you know, maybe actually well-known technology isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think it does potentially require new models of collaboration, and I very much agree there are inefficiencies that would be good to iron out of current systems. But the key questions I would have for people thinking, thank you, about engaging with this technology is, if you're going to use something like blockchain, who do you end up trusting? What's the actual trust system that you're putting into place there? What can go wrong for your interactions on that system? And if something goes wrong, what are you going to do? What can you do? What's the sort of recourse to compensation? And another aspect is whether or not the essence of the problems you're trying to address are actually technology problems. I'd like to be self-reflective enough to realize, despite my computer science interests, often we create problems rather than solving them with complexity. Sometimes there's social mechanisms that can actually work better to solve some sorts of issues. So that's really where I want to lead. And I'm very happy to clarify those points later, but my time is up. Brendan, you're on mute. I stole a few extra seconds.
Yeah, sorry about that. That's a good point. So thanks, David. Moving straight across into Walter Langelaar, who's a lecturer in design at Vic Uni. Walter, across to you. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Brandon. And also, yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's really good to be in this company today. Also, as a quick introduction, I'm Walter Langelaar. I'm an artist from the Netherlands originally, moved to New Zealand about 9 years ago, and actually, as of today, a New Zealand citizen, Aotearoa New Zealand citizen, I should say. So in the context of digital ledgers and digital and identity systems and so forth, this is somewhat relevant to mention possibly. I think maybe given my background is in fine arts and turning into a bit of a nerd over the years, I think I'm coming at this very much from a cultural angle. So what I would like to talk about for a couple of minutes is some of the opportunities for New Zealand that I see, and also maybe some of the current state of things in that context. So I think, and partly that's also really good about this webinar today, I think it's really necessary for us to move beyond a lot of these introductory blockchain talks in New Zealand. And obviously, like, since Bitcoin has been out for a good 10 years now and Ethereum for a little bit less, there's still a lot of like introductory level explaining in popular media that apparently seems to be necessary, where at least from an international perspective, we could argue that possibly New Zealand is lagging a little bit behind there. There's been some moderate activity in terms of like conferences and debates and yeah, more switched on discussions. You could argue since around 2017, which is also when I got into, or this is kind of when I started bending my career to be more about blockchain and adjacent technologies. And so another related topic that I've especially seen as of recent with the weirdness of the NFT hypes is indeed similar to what David already mentioned as well, or at least David touched upon this a little bit, but I see this widespread misinformation about the ecological impact, or the supposed alleged ecological impact of all blockchains, which I think we need to tackle a bit better, because it creates some kind of fear-mongering among mainstream audiences that make people really reluctant to adopt this new technology. And for reference, I would suggest looking at Joanna Moll's recent project on carbolytics, which is really interesting in terms of unpacking all kinds of digitally networked technologies such as cookies and the environmental impact of those. And arguably blockchains might not all be that bad. And of course, here I'm talking about proof of stake blockchains, especially. So similarly, I would say that, again, going from popular media on the topic and talking about mainstream adoption, this kind of misplaced fascination for ownership of digital objects is a little bit unfortunate. And in that context, I would say we really need better education and research support across the country on, again, going from my field, historical relevance and the future impact of media arts and computational design. So in most universities in New Zealand today, we still see these heavy siloed programs that, for example, also in NCAA high school curriculums, like this idea of STEM and STEAM, having had a lot of attention in the recent decades, is possibly a bit dated now. And I think blockchain research and education, or especially the education part, needs a thorough foundation of research and study across fields such as law, governance, science and engineering, media studies, social sciences, and again, art and design. So especially there, also understanding that, as we've seen again with the recent NFT hypes, we can argue that art and cultural production more generally is not some afterthought of stuff that you can do with this new technology, but it's actually proven to be inherent to the mainstream adoption of this technology. And in that sense, I would also say, and I understand that part of the audience today is primary industries, agriculture focused potentially. So what I would like to state is that this is actually the emerging primary industry of the digitally networked world. And also there, New Zealand has all kinds of new opportunities with an already well-developed film and entertainment sector. But for example, very little support for video game developers and more cutting-edge cultural products or digital cultural products. And here I'm kind of hinting at Creative New Zealand potentially needing to up its game a little bit in this field. And then as a closing statement, I would like to say that I believe that Aotearoa New Zealand can be world leading in blockchain native objects with critical access control. So that's a little bit similar to what David was talking about when discussing the different chains. But yeah, access controls that represent our shared values on indigenous worldview, data privacy protection, and a carbon neutral footprint, and how those three things are interrelated actually. So I think blockchain tech is actually a really good way for us to demonstrate to the world how we make things in our country. Thank you.
Brilliant, Walter. Thank you so much. Moving straight along to Chris Claridge, who's the chair of the Trust Alliance New Zealand. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Brendan. Kia ora, everyone. I must state at the outset that my understanding of blockchain is limited. So please excuse that I won't talk about the comparison of Hyperledger Aries to Hyperledger this or whatever. I'm not particularly interested. And so I'm going to give you a more of a prosaic view. My daytime role is as the CEO of Potatoes New Zealand, which represents potato growers and processors and exporters, or as I say, the three main food groups: chips, crisps, and potatoes. The Trust Alliance is made up of 30 members from the primary sector, and we essentially, through our members' constituents, digitally touch each farm 4 or 5 times. That enables us, and we have financiers, banks, digital service providers, processors, various people across the primary sector. So we're interested in blockchain in a very fundamental and simple way, as merely a tool, as part of, if you like, a technology stack. And even then we have question marks around it. So we're evaluating it in terms of, is it of use? But we're not really, definitely not blockchain zealots. Where we probably come from in terms of our technology requirements is around self-sovereign identity. And in particular, what we're looking to do is preserve and enhance the global competitiveness of New Zealand's primary sector. And what we want to do is protect the value of products of what we do and enhance their value, ensuring neutrality and collaboration, and solve industry issues so as to reduce costs of compliance and ensure value to the participants. Because what we've seen is that when we try to optimize our supply chains in the primary sector, we're seeing a rise of service providers and compliance costs, which don't add value, they merely subtract it. So what we're trying to do is work out how do we reduce costs and friction in the marketplace and ensure that value adheres. Now, one of the key things is to ensure that the primary sector takes advantage of the digital identity framework to enable digital sovereignty for our members and the contributing parties. And there's some key things that we wish to do. One is create standards for our members, provide governance and around common data types and how data will be permissioned, and providing a sustainable technology-based tools and protocols that enable members to innovate and add value, and maintaining the privacy and digital rights of those members where they require it. And principally, a core principle is to acknowledge the Treaty of Waitangi and the bicultural foundations of Aotearoa New Zealand. And lastly, supporting the 4 pillars of sustainability, economic, social, human, and environmental. So that's at the core of what it is that we do. We're probably, if you use so we're members of the Digital Identity Forum worldwide. We're interested, and we released in GitHub some software development kits around the trust triangle. We're interested in the layers. Now, as to blockchain, we really, and this is, please don't take this the wrong way, don't really care. It's just merely another technology. It's neither another tool. We're not zealots on it. If it works for us. If it doesn't work, we'll move on. We merely want to execute and deliver. We're not really interested in the academic arguments. For those of you who are interested, we use substrate parity. We've looked at Hyperledger. We've looked at other things. Have we looked at tokens? Yes. Do we see tokenization as a key thing? Probably not. Are we a public blockchain? Probably not. Is it private permissioned? That's probably where we're looking at. Do we know what we're going to use? No. Would we want someone to turn up and have done some work to evaluate different ones? Absolutely. That's why we'd like Veracity Lab to do that work. But we are really primarily interested in execution rather than the academic pursuit. Thank you. It's going to be an interesting.
Thank you so much. You came in perfectly on time. So that was just a beautiful thing there. Now, what I think would be quite a nice thing to do is amongst the 4 that are 4 speakers, that's Robert, David, Walter, and Chris. Do any of you have a question for the other? I see in the chat there's a couple of discussions going out, but for each other, was there some clarification or some sort of insight you'd like to dig a bit deeper with each other? And if you could all unmute, it's your chance to sort of talk amongst yourselves.
Sure.
That's Walter, Chris, and Robert. So off you go, David.
Thanks. Yeah, sorry, I kind of grabbed the conversational chair by kind of putting in a sound first. I mean, there's all sorts of things I'd love to talk more about, and I'm totally fine with that academic versus pragmatism separation. So no offense taken in the slightest, Chris. But indeed, one of the things I would be interested in is still with respect to your pragmatism of the choice of technology. And I mean, absolutely, you're focusing on what you need. You don't have to care about those details. I still think that we're at this risky point where there is a kind of sales versus client relationship here, where a lot of the pros of one mechanism are being confused against the cons of other mechanisms. So at least trying to kind of clarify some of that detail, I think, is possibly relevant. And I mean, that's why I put in place those 2 key points of environmental cost of the underlying infrastructure and the contestability. Do you reckon that that is worthwhile, Chris? I mean, that for your pragmatism, looking at just applying something, not caring about the details, is it still useful for us to start talking more about where these solutions fit on some defined axes, of which I've suggested 2?
So the criteria, the evaluation of technology is always an interesting debate. David. And I'm probably not I'm a botanist by training, so.
That's ideal. That's ideal. It means you know what it's for rather than the technology leading to it.
Yes. So look, can I be blunt?
Sure.
We're years behind the rest of the world. We're buggering around in the minutiae. We have to move forward and do stuff. I'm really nervous about, and when I go to engage internationally, see where other people are up to. It's been a bit of an eye-opener the last 3 months. It's like, holy heck, we're way behind. And I don't know who mentioned it. I think it was Robert, I'm not sure, or we're way behind. And I hate to say this, I'm going to point the finger at the universities.
That's okay.
Look, please move towards a discussion about execution rather than the academic pursuit of the glass bead game. Because unless you, and this is the differentiation between pure research and applied research, I think we need to move the universities, and I'm hoping and I'm looking at Kelly and Veracity Labs, to move it towards the experimental and actual, because we have to start trialing these technologies, we have to use them, we have to get them out in the marketplace, we have to get out and do stuff, and rather than talk around in endless loops amongst ourselves over whether, you know, and I've gone down this rabbit hole of substrate versus hyperledger, and, you know, really, do we really care? And I know the proof of work versus the proof of stake and the various, you know, the Byzantine proof and all of those debates. That if people can work that out, what we're interested in doing is talking to people who want to make stuff work. The criteria for choosing technology has to be simple, easy to execute, but it's got to be sustainable, and it also has to have people that know how to use it. The problem we've got is we, as an organization, are not looking to New Zealand providers to provide us with the tools. We've given up. It's like you're years behind the rest of the world. We've got to go offshore, and that's where we're actively now doing that. So an answer to you, David, my nervousness is, and I raised this with Canterbury University when they're sitting doing dumb stuff in blockchain, and please excuse my agricultural language, for God's sake, do stuff that's applied, that is practical, get away from the academic, move to the execution and implementation. Otherwise you will be, you know, it'll be fun for you, but of no use to anyone else.
Sure, but one parting question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So David, just going across to Walter, who's got his hand up.
Yeah, so I'd like to respond especially to the idea that's being posed of what is an academic pursuit, because again, coming from the arts and teaching at Victoria University in the design school, yeah, there is such a thing as creative research outputs. And since I started setting up a blockchain course in 2017, which took about a year of paperwork to get it through the university mill, as it goes with these things, but have been teaching that since 2019. And so for the last 3 years, I mean, it is indeed, it's especially back in 2019, this was super niche, extremely obscure to be talking to students about the state of the field at that time. But obviously, with the rise of the popularity of the field, this year we're looking at a completely different scenario. And maybe if this could be helpful to the Trust Alliance, I mean, through this course, people have not only theorized about what might be possible, but basically projects have been constructed and delivered on a variety of blockchains. And I totally agree with the idea that we are lagging behind. I mean, I did kind of say that in my own little rant as well. But yeah, and again, also there, I would like to support the notion that there needs to be a heavy injection of support and investment, especially in research and education in this particular field, so that we can have yeah, majors, schools, departments, research labs, and so forth, all across the country on this topic.
Thank you, Walter. We're going to go to Robert and then back to David. Robert, and could you put your hand down, Walter, when you...
Oh, yeah. So having been immersed in the space for, well, I first got introduced to this whole area in 2001, more than anything, which was by a paper called from Simon Petton-Jones and Mark Ellis, which was basically Adventures in Financial Contracts, or something to that extent, which was looking at how to implement domain-specific languages for financial derivative contracts, which was the area I was working in at the time. And that got me really sort of interested in that. And since then, so what's that, 20 odd years, trying to talk to people about the use of computers and domain-specific languages and how to use them for coordination purposes. I would have said I've lost my hair. Literally, I used to have long hair, so I could say I have. But specifically in talking about blockchains, it's been an interesting exercise, but at the same time, I would say that This is typical of new technology. As new technology bridges out of the sort of academic space, which you could argue all the cypherpunk stuff, which was the original sort of domain of all the cryptocurrencies and digital money space for quite a while. It takes a while for people's ideas to cement and understanding and knowledge. So a lot of the commentary that like Walter brought up in blockchains and stuff is a lot of the awe and wonder type of commentary, you know, or in more recently in the case of NFTs is the scaremongering, the FUD, the uncertainty and the doubt that goes with all sorts of new technologies. I've seen it enough with the internet. TCP/IP was the same sort of stuff. So to me, it's just the same sort of trajectory. What is happening more recently, and to Walter's earlier point, which was that the cultural products are actually a good way to actually introduce people to this. I've always sort of seen cultural products, in particular what has now been referred rightly or wrongly as NFTs, as being the gateway drug into the space in many respects. It has introduced to a lot of people to understand at the minimum level what this could be used for beyond the money context. Unfortunately, most of the narrative is still wrong. The fact that it's got a moniker called non-fungible tokens or NFTs is problematic in its own right. But most people don't think of it in terms of property rights. That this is actually a token like this can represent property and what we can do with it and how we can change it. With respects to where things are at, like Chris was talking about earlier about overseas, well, definitely from a policy point of view, Australia, Singapore, those sort of countries are doing an amazing sort of work. And technology-wise, like in most of the cases, Australia is pumping in a huge amount of money into the space as part of their blockchain roadmap. And so there's quite, you know, in terms of our neighbour, what's happening across the ditch, there's quite a lot going on. And very, very little here. That does not surprise me a lot. That it's fairly typical of the New Zealand technology scene. It tends to lag by several years. I sort of roughly think about 4 to 5 years that it lags behind where everyone else is at. And that's been true of pretty much all the technology over the years that I've been party or worked on over the time. However, I will say, I'll just do a little bit of pitch here, I guess, which is to say that our Ministry of Culture and Heritage has actually co-funded some interesting work that I am doing that is about actually pulling execution together and specifically to represent Mātauranga Māori rights, intellectual property rights that cover a common sort of use of information. And this is going to be based on a sort of blockchain work. So there is these opportunities that will start to emerge that I'm seeing pop up that will actually help us going forward. And I think we're actually in a really, really good position. Personally, I think for if we can bring in Te Ao Māori into this technology, that's really, really important because fundamentally it's actually about trying to build, as I touched on earlier in the position statement, about new forms of value and more specifically new forms of common and public value. There's new opportunities, for example, for funding public goods and those sort of things.
Great, thanks, Robert. Hey, David, before we do go to you, I know that Kelly has to leave. And Kelly, I don't want to put you on the spot, I know you're going to leave, but I really wanted to bring in your work in the social side of this, which and as part of Veracity, which is really important. And I think where we were going just then with Robert, you know, might be very useful. So Kelly, just before you leave, is there something particularly you would like to contribute to the discussion? You're on mute.
Maybe I should stay on mute. I've been listening with fascination to the blockchain, but I'm really not an expert in blockchain at all. So my research is looking at like software teams and how they work together, and I look at the human aspects of software engineering specifically, but I'm not sure that that adds necessarily to the blockchain conversation.
Okay, thank you. Just I know, because I do know you have to leave shortly and you're going to drop off there. So David, just to wrap this up, and I've left a note there in the chat. that we're wanting to wrap this up in sort of 3-4 minutes and really open it up. David, is there anything just to sort of close out on that you want to raise?
I'm not sure that I was planning to coherently close out. I was more going to try to throw some extra questions into the mix and see where we go.
That's what
but
I mean.
Might be fine.
We'll push it out.
Yeah. So one of the things that is interesting for me, like I said, I don't actually do much research actually in academics of blockchain. We were trying to look to build solutions in a related space and sort of got sucked in sideways into blockchain. I'm interested particularly to hear from those that have the experience overseas and reflecting on the fact that we are behind in New Zealand. What's likely to happen in terms of the kind of regulatory landscape? That's one of the questions I'd put out there. I'm interested in whether or not some of the savings that appear to come from blockchain-like implementations come because they're kind of new tech and they're in niche areas. But actually, when push comes to shove with respect to the contestability, you're going to end up in a system where the law and the politics are going to become involved. And that is going to mean that you're going to need to make technical modifications. Do you end up essentially just coming right back to where you started and ending up with a system that has high costs, just as the perceived high costs in the current status quo? I can see absolutely the status quo has some grinding to a halt inefficiencies that would strike people working in supply chains, for example. But the sort of academic in me would say, what are the alternatives? Blockchain might be able to help with that, but what are the externalities? And I think I'm still not comfortable that we have a grip on those. I appreciate that we can be in a situation where demonstrating technologies that, for example, don't have a really bad environmental footprint, if you show they work, people can just adopt them, and that's great. We can move forwards. But I still feel that it's important not to be blinded to the difficulties that can exist with some of the problem areas that have actually been let loose in terms of the blockchain space, and that's not something that I feel is yet resolved. One technical point I'd throw out there, it has been put that for open blockchains, that's the kind of Ethereum, Bitcoin type systems, if you use those, that actually you need to have a cryptocurrency coupled with them because otherwise you can't pay people to participate. And that's one I'd throw out there for the more technically detailed. For me, that still reinforces my view at the moment, which I'm totally happy to have corrected, that I am really anti-open blockchain, and I really would be much more comfortable with these closed systems that you've got the ability to identify who's participating rather than agreeing to trust a sort of open collaboration of people you don't see. So sorry, Brendan, that wasn't a coherent conclusion, but it was some points.
I love
and now
that.
we can go into other discussion of points.
No, that's a really good point to finish on. Thank you very much. So look, we've got about 20-30, we're about 28-30 participants here. What I've just asked Matthias to do is to, who's been assisting with us, is to sort of maybe summarize what he's read on the side, and then we're going to open this up. So people can raise their hands. If Jeff's got his hand up, we'll go from Matthias and then across to Jeff. Off you go, Matthias.
So just from the discussions, I think one or two themes that emerged for me were the one that we need to be more careful about what we're talking about. There is this discussion going on in academia versus what is actually useful in practice. So maybe this is something we can explore further, what researchers do, what academia do, and how all these discussions in academia can translate into something useful. And I think the other high-level theme I noticed was about the status of New Zealand and where it sits in comparison to the world. So maybe another area we could explore in the discussions could be around, well, what can we do in New Zealand? I mean, most of us, or many of the participants are in academia or do innovation research, and this is a seminar of the Veracity Lab. So our mission is to help industry to move forward, to compete at a global scale. So maybe this is another area of discussion. And then there was one thing that came up in the chat. I think it was a comment about a proof of stake. I don't know if this is something I think David and Steve brought up, if this is something you would like to briefly comment on, just to bring this into the discussion as well.
Do you want to do that now? We'll just slip across there before we go to Jeff. I think it was Steve Reeves.
Yes,
I think it was discussion. Steve.
Yeah, because there was also the discussion from the panelists about value, and blockchain was mostly used or intended for financial transactions, or at least the perception was. about that. So yeah, I thought maybe this could be an interesting talking point as well.
Great. Steve, just across to you, and please introduce yourself as part of Veracity Lab. Thank you.
Kia ora, thanks, Brendan. Yeah, I'm a professor at software engineering at University of Waikato and part of the Veracity project. And I've had some experience, purely academic, I'm afraid, with blockchain technology over the years. And my comment there was simply to bring up some news that I saw today, which is that yet again, Ethereum are announcing a proof of stake basis to the Ethereum blockchain, which is sort of the widest used open blockchain with these so-called smart contracts on. Whether it actually comes to fruition this time, we'll have to see. It seems pretty detailed and definite, so perhaps they mean it this time. Be interesting to see, and it will make a big difference, I think, both practically in terms of energy use, but also politically in terms of acceptability, I guess. So that might be something to keep an eye on. While I have the floor, can I just say also that one of the things that I see, and a role I've played in the last few years, actually, not recently, but perhaps in, up to a couple of years ago, as an academic, is to talk to companies who have been approached by, let's say, the big four services companies like KPMG, Deloitte, and so on, who claim various things about blockchain technology which are at best questionable, in exchange for solving all these companies' problems for large amounts of money. And these companies come to people like me who are seen as independent, and I think that's an important role of an academic, seen as independent, and they ask the question, is what KPMG have told us really true? And actually, most of the time, the answer has been absolutely not. They're out to make money, they're not out to solve your problems, or at least as a second order. So I'm the role of the academic here. We do actually have a practical role, which is to be an independent voice in these sorts of things. And I think that's valuable in a very practical way, and it shouldn't be put to one side as, people indulging in arguments about unimportant things. I think that is an important thing. And it's been practically shown in the particular area of blockchain over the last few years in industry in New Zealand. So that's just a point I'd like to make in defending my people. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Across to Jeff.
Kia ora, folks. It's nice to be introduced to Veracity and all of you that I am becoming aware of. So I'm Jeff, I'm at AUT. And just about Ethereum there, right? They've been planning this actually from the beginning to shift to proof of stake. It's just proved to be, an incredibly difficult problem. And they kind of have all the research worked out, and it's just up to the coders at this point to see if they've covered all the bases and all the known unknowns. So I think it's it could be like the crypto story of the year if the merge goes through this year. And if it doesn't, then it's going to be the same old story as the last, 3 or 4 years where they keep getting closer and closer. But I have a question for the panel. So I'm working on a project through a SIFTI grant, and we're looking at storing information. So we have information about indigenous flora and fauna, which, as I see it, is essentially like biological IP or even cultural IP as well. And we're looking at storing this information, for the client to be used ongoing, basically bank all the knowledge that they have right now and be able to have it as an ongoing store for them going forward. So I guess I'm looking for opinions here, really. And the question is, can valuable data like this, and I don't mean like value itself. I think Bitcoin has shown that money works pretty well on a blockchain. but can valuable data, so we all know that it is valuable, and this crosses over a lot to the identity space as well, right? Where that data is extremely valuable to the individual, so much so that like everything has to shut down when it becomes unavailable, but to somebody else maybe not so valuable. So basically, can we put this data on a public blockchain, or are we rowing upstream, and in 5 or 10 years, or even sooner, we're gonna have to throw it in and say, no, it can't be done, and go back to our old ways? So that's my question for everyone. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Straight across to Tim.
Is that to answer the question?
Yeah, no, I'll let David answer that question first, because
wow.
Mine's
again,
totally...
I'm cheating by kind of jumping in first on audio, but I mean, others correct me. I believe the answer is, in the current techniques, no to your direct question. I mean, because you typically don't store the whole data object on the blockchain anyway, you store a reference to it, which means that you can get an identifier for your data that will be immutable and stored up to the trustworthiness of the blockchain you're using, but you'll still need to put it somewhere. And that's the kind of NFT question about the idea that you've got a URL that refers to the artwork you purchased, but the server that's storing the artwork may go down and you may have it disappear. So I believe, what I don't know, and anyone else on the panel can correct me on that, is whether there's a thought process to integrate much larger object storage into a direct blockchain system, but I don't think that's the way that the foreseeable future looks to have the transaction rates increase with blockchain. So it can be useful for you, but not for actually storing the data itself, more for making sure that you can show provenance of the data in some way, or ownership of the data, or stake a claim to the data in various senses.
Very good, Robert. And Walter, are you wanting to help answer that question? If so, step in, please.
Yeah, I would say that you do not put the raw data, in a sense, onto a blockchain. You just don't do that. What a blockchain is basically for recording events, as I said, of things that happen. So if you've got some sort of object that has a life cycle of its own, we can often think of these in the domain of a business. We'll talk about business processes. In the case of a digital network, we'll talk about collaborative processes, because we're going across different trust boundaries. What we're saying here is that there's a certain process that enables this stuff to be updated or changed or transferred in some way. And what we're recording is the events that actually affect that object over its lifetime. That gives us the ability to then roll back, if you like, or look at the changes to make sure that they're clear and the veracity is all there. As far as storage is concerned, this is more on the umbrella of Web3, which is about using other forms of technology as well to store information. So there's a lot of work going on in terms of what are effectively bit level preservation of block storage, things like IPFS, Arweave, and Veracity and various other sort of technologies that are designed to actually do replicated data storage in some way, shape, or form. And so essentially the two blockchain will work with the replicated storage to say, hey, here's the hash, or here's a pointer to what we're talking about, it's over here. And if you've got the right ownership or property rights associated with that object, you can then access it, or you can then update it, or you can do something else like that.
Thanks, Robert. And across to Walter.
Yeah, maybe just a quick exercise that I do with my students in my blockchain bootcamp paper is actually going from a quote that Vitalik Buterin had in a conference at some point, which is basically asking the question, do you need a blockchain? Because of course the blockchain sphere has been plagued by weird teams and groups just spinning up blockchains for just about anything, which is fairly similar to app design for smartphones. It's just the tyranny of apps, so to say. And the thing with blockchains is that you can ask, if you compare to a library card, which is like a centralized system where basically you want that protected because you don't really want other people to know what you're reading. So that's like a first example. Going to a decentralized version, which arguably is something like BitTorrenting. So you can download, for example, movies or music using the BitTorrent protocol. But again, you probably don't want other people to know what you're actually downloading, because you get all kinds of potential infringements. And then the third one being, and that's kind of where the blockchain requirement checks out, is do you need radical transparency, or maybe in terms that David earlier used, do you need some kind of contestability? And that is when you need a blockchain. So if you are putting data on a blockchain where you need some kind of public verification method for anyone, or maybe a set group of users, to be able to contest whether that data is truthful or not, that only then do you actually need a blockchain. And at the time Vitalik was explaining this, to kind of, I think he was some kind of hopeful that people wouldn't again be spinning up blockchains just for just about anything, but that people would get a bit more concise about when they actually need to grab blockchain technology for a specific purpose.
Cool, Walter. Now I saw Chris's eyes roll when Robert said no raw data on blockchain. So over to you, Chris.
Yeah. Okay. So that was the right answer. So to an earlier comment, which was actually quite brilliant from the chap, and I'm sorry his name's disappeared, Mr. Reeves, I think, from the Waikato University. Some people use this as a shiny toy to extract money for doing very little. So that's why I'm deeply cynical about blockchain. Yes, thanks, Steve. And yes, the four, I think they're called four pirates, I think is probably the way of describing them. Yeah. So to your question, Jeff, is the blockchain is simply a change log. It's simply a record. And if you want to create a, and sorry to put my botanist hat on here, if you want to create a taxonomic framework in which you put data objects, a DID or decentralized identifier can allow you to do that if you really need to. That allows you to have it verified by other parties. And so I'd draw your attention to the W3C verifiable credentials data model if you're really interested. Now, that then can be related to a blockchain. If you want, yeah, thumbs up to DIDs. Yes, we're the DIDs people. We don't care about blockchains. Blockchain, I mean, well, we do care, but we don't. I mean, we're at the pointy end of identity. Earlier comments about, if I go back, there were some comments here about New Zealand's legislation. There's a trust framework being set up through the DIA, which is really crucial around building trust frameworks for those of you who understand DID architecture. So that's a bill that's coming into going to be up to come in to build for digital identity for individuals and organizations. Digital identity to us is at the core of it. So Jeff, what you're talking about is identity, and digital identity, particular around objects. And if you want to protect that and want to store it in an immutable way, the blockchain is part of it, but it's only a minor part of the overall process. And the problem is that we've learned to talk about blockchain, but we haven't learned to talk about the tech stack. We're interested in the tech stack all the way to the ecosystem up the top, classic SSI tech stack, getting the data in, how you might manage DIDCOMs, all of that stuff. Blockchain, guys, we've got to get past the blockchain conversation and move towards how we talk across the tech stack. Because my real concern is here that we're looking at one layer and we're not looking at the whole execution. That goes to my early comment about applied versus basic research. We want to get stuff that works. We're behind. Why are we behind? We don't have the same funding level, but we're not looking off internationally to bring models back. New South Wales government are putting SSI in, did architecture, Singaporean government. So while we're busy talking about blockchain, we're losing sight of actual stuff that works. That's why I'm worried about where we're heading. And as a former academic, I can say that. And no, it wasn't in computer science. But that's what I'm worried about. It's not ever and having been a dean of a department and trying to keep researchers moving, we've got to break through this. You know, I'm really nervous when I hear discussions about Ethereum and proof of work and proof of stake. From an industry perspective, I'm really nervous. That shouldn't be our concerns. Our concerns should be, yes, and we've got to be able to separate these two, because industry won't be able to talk to researchers unless we've got applied. Yeah.
One point I'd jump in though there is externality, and I would like to think that you would consider the externalities if it was shown that, for example, a choice facilitated ransomware or severe environmental degradation versus an easy choice for you, which would avoid that problem.
Yeah, and the question is, but Jeff, yeah, good question, but so you're talking to the decentralized people, the Trust Alliance, we're decentralized. We sort of have a nervousness around government getting piles of data within which they roll around for various reasons, some of which are non-productive, just quietly, because we see that a lot inside the primary industries. MPI has 400 data sets that don't talk to each other. Giving them another data set doesn't really set our world alight, just quietly. So
okay, Jeff, you've got to write a
answers.
response there. Yeah, cool. Jeff, I'm just quite, because Tim's patiently in the corner there, but Jeff, is that enough, or do you want to come back and, because I see in the chats that you've got some other discussion there.
Oh no, that's all right. Thank you very much, everyone. Yeah, I wasn't too worried about implementation, and certainly IPFS is a great tool, but in the early stages, and for something like what Chris would want to do, there's no way in hell you're going to want to trust the IPFS for any of that. But thank you. I'll pass the floor. Thank you.
Wonderful, Jeff. Okay, Tim.
Right. Thanks very much, Brendan. I think, okay, so I'm not very knowledgeable at all about the technical side of blockchains, and I think that there's been a lot of discussion about that in the chat. The thing that really interests me, which I think was great to hear you saying, Chris, that blockchains is just a tool. And I think the opportunity of some of the research that could go on within the Veracity Lab is that one of actually saying, okay, what are the qualities of this tool? What are the uniquenesses of that tool that I can use in a really different and creative way, rather than just follow the herd and actually try and solve these enormous great problems, which are probably insolvable. I think New Zealand, one of the great things about New Zealand is we're very good at picking up technology, doing things in a very boutique way for a very specific reason, and then propagating those in a really interesting way. So I think for me, thinking about blockchains as a tool and drilling down to what the uniqueness of the way we marry problems up with them, I think is far more interesting than maybe trying to tackle the bigger issues.
Thank you, Tim.
Could I make a quick comment on that?
Sure, Walter.
Okay, so, yeah. So, I mean, again, speaking as a freshly certified New Zealand citizen, I do want to put a critical note on that idea that in New Zealand, we're very good at pioneering and early adopting and stuff, because, I mean, it's, yeah, as several speakers have acknowledged, in this particular example, we're not, because we haven't. So again, as a bit of a pressure point to say that more support and investment is needed, I would argue that, yeah, in the case of this particular technology, we kind of missed the boat a little bit, at least.
Is it greater collaboration, Walter? Because I would agree, I think what New Zealand is brilliant at, we're great at spinning a yarn. I mean, people love our stories, 100% pure, we feed the world, 40 million people apparently. It goes on, right? So we could be the best in the world at something. So, but we are tiny. So if we're going to have impact, how do you see that coming about? Where and how do you see that coming about from your experience?
Well, I think an additional, or again, to kind of highlight another opportunity that's omitted a little bit in some of the discussion, is that I fully agree with much of what Chris is saying about how we could or should be able to do things in the country. And I also totally support the notes on the tech stack, which has a couple of other stories behind it, obviously, as well in recent New Zealand history. But I think, again, like from an international perspective, there's a massive economic opportunity for us to engage with all these new economies where not even millions, billions, trillions of dollars are going around. And again, where interestingly, because this doesn't happen all the time, where actually for a large part cultural production is a main driver. And at least, again, speaking from my background, I hope that in the near future, with the different ministries and funding bodies and other parts of the private sector as well, I hope that we can get better at understanding that economic opportunity, because it's something completely different than, say, local production and serving internal needs. But again, like looking at the very awesome cultural products that New Zealand is able to make, I think that is actually an area where we can leapfrog significantly when compared to this little deficit that we have currently in the general development on this technology.
So that's what you call those gateway drugs.
Yeah, well, that wasn't me. That was Robert.
I like that. Well, there he is. He wants to tell us more about it. So off you go, Robert.
Low-hanging fruit.
You've got everybody listening. And Darren, you're up. You're up next.
I was going to specifically talk to some of the comments that Chris has made around we don't care about blockchains, we only care about the top end of the stack. And that's fine, but all technology goes through evolutionary processes. Today, we don't care about HTTP or web servers and stuff like that. It's just a web page to everyone else. But when it first comes out, we do actually have to care about these sort of things. In the conversations with just TCP/IP, when it was coming out at the time, people were saying, no, TCP/IP is too slow, it's useless, we won't use it, that sort of stuff. No one will go off and use it. So all the discussion was down there. We couldn't have the discussion about connecting up networks across different organizations and the benefit that was going on, because people just did not understand enough about it. And that was true of the web as well. The discussions, I quite frankly remember a conversation in the mid-90s, early 90s in fact, where we were doing a proposal for Te Papa, this new museum that was being created to do the kiosks. And we were using something called Hyper-G, that Herman Mura was working some work out of Auckland University at the time, as well. It was part of the European thing. And this was a direct competitor to Mosaic at the time. And the comments was, no one's going to want hypermedia, no one's going to link pages, those sort of things, because they cannot understand the value at that point in time. And one of the biggest difficulties I've found in trying to talk about how a blockchain can be used, and indeed that goes along with all the digital identity stuff, for which I'm very familiar, is that there are so many moving parts to understand this technology. It's socio-technical technology. You've got to bring in the social element as well as the technical element. It crosses boundaries of accounting, of finance, economics, law, a whole lot of things, different things, to understand how to actually use it. And frankly, most people, not even in New Zealand, understand how to use it. There's a small group of people that have a clue, but that's about it. In terms of what can actually be done and where it can be applied. And so going back to Chris's point as well, what's actually really quite important is, because it is so relatively new, and quite frankly, no one knows whether it's useful or not. We're all just hoping that it is in some way, or indeed, we don't even know if the SSI digital identity technology is going to be useful or not. We just don't know. We're just hoping. we've got to actually get in there and try it out and play around with it. And that's, so I can concur with Chris's point about that area, but also understand where it is in the evolutionary cycle. All technology goes through this pattern of adoption. Carlota Perez's work of the role of financial technology and the role of capital and the adoption of technology is really, really quite an important body of work that she's done that shows this evolutionary sort of cycle.
Thank you. Darren, welcome. You've got the floor.
Thanks, Brendan. You probably know what I'm going to say. I think we've spoken about this at length.
Hey, but Darren, can you introduce yourself? Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I currently run a business called MyApri, but I've been involved in the New Zealand tech sector for a while in a number of startups and a number of business accelerators, Ice House, BIC, which was AET's one before it folded, Soda, and a bunch of others. And what I see all the time in New Zealand, and I think I'm seeing it here, just watching the conversation, and I'm kind of timing it now because I kind of need to go shortly, I feel in New Zealand we have this great desire and need as a tech community to want to own the technology and be something cutting edge and new. But I think our real opportunity as New Zealanders or as a country is to build the business plan of how this can be used. I totally agree with Chris. I don't give a flying fart about the technology. The technology is probably going to change over time, as you've alluded to. But how is this practically going to be used to protect our Tonga and represent our Tonga as a nation? And how, so this is where I think, like, what's the actual goal? Like, how are you even evaluating the technology? Like, where's this business plan on the goal, or what are we trying to achieve and actually buy people into? And I think I can see on this call, there's not a lot of commercial people on the call as far as I can tell. And I think that's where this is lacking, and I've tried to bring it back to this a lot. What are we trying to achieve from the business case? And I think we need to evaluate the technology against the business case of how we're going to protect the Tonga, and then how are we going to take that to the world as a trusted authority. This is what New Zealand's using or the global's using, and take that to the world as our innovation and really nut that out. I think that's what needs to be nutted out here. And then the technology will fall in place once we know what we're actually trying to achieve.
Brilliant. By the way, everybody, and I'll just come back to you, Chris, there are a few people on this call who are part of our use case, and we're looking at working with Darren on that in a very practical and applied way. So I'll come back to that towards the end in terms of our use cases. But Chris, you've got your hand back up again. That's excellent. Over to you, mate.
Kia ora, Darren. That was good to hear. Look, the Trust Alliance is all about the business cases. We have business cases coming out our ears. We know this because we're getting told by our customers they want proof. We have to move from the brand promise to what we call now the brand proof. And that requires us to demonstrate through evidence rather than a good story, the 100% proof story, demonstrate actually that what we produce here is safe, it's efficacious, and it meets those sustainable requirements that the marketplace so desperately wants. And that hopefully will allow us to command. So we know what the business cases are. And I can tell you now that we've got a lot of businesses sitting in the room. We can't necessarily turn around to find execution. That's the issue. That's the wero I'm laying down in front of you, is that we need to, yes, I get there's the academic requirements, and as someone who sat there and watched the internet turn up in 1991 in Christchurch Polytechnic when we patched into it, I get the curve that we're on, but Robert, I would say it's moving even faster than what it was in the 90s. The rate is phenomenal. You used to say in the internet days, 1 year is 7, it's dog years. Like, it's 1 month. It's down to the rate of knots is huge. My concern is that unless we organize in the academic around practical, relevant issues to solve problems for the business and primary sector, then we're going to run into problems that you've ended up in a cul-de-sac debating, minutiae, and we have them, and botanists have them, where they go through cladistics and taxonomic techniques and how do you actually go. I'm just a bit worried. I'm keen for applied stuff, and I know that we've got a problem in applied research, and yes, it is expensive, but industry has got the resources and the money to do it, but we don't necessarily have anyone we can turn around and have a conversation with, because that's the problem we're having. I can tell you now, if you ask me, who can we pick up a phone and have a conversation with about practical execution in New Zealand, I can tell you capability and capacity is lacking, and that's of concern. That's the bit. Yes, we've got trainees that are coming out, but if we go to the big IT firms, they're not across this. That's what we know. I won't name names, but we know they don't have the capability and capacity. So somehow we've got to sprint through to developing execution and application capability in this area. So that's what I'm looking to the academic world and to work out how to do that. Industry's sitting there needing it. The challenge is, how do we do this going forward?
Robert.
I'll just point out that there's actually quite a number of projects occurring that are blockchain related occurring in New Zealand. So for example, the ENS, which is the Ethereum name system, the lead of that project is based in Christchurch. Decentraland, which is a metaverse kind of 3D world, was based out of here in Wellington. In terms of where they were started and the key developers, and there's a few others that I'm familiar with. And this is fairly typical of the environment within New Zealand, is that actually there are a lot of people working on stuff, doing interesting things, but it's actually for projects overseas. Yeah, they work at home and they're reaching out to the world because basically no one knows what they're talking about here. You know? And
well, they can't get paid enough here. That's the problem.
And that too, yeah, that too. They can't get paid enough. Those sort of things. So, I'm working with a group of people all over the world at the moment, and only a few based here, only 2 or 3 based here in New Zealand. That doesn't actually worry me so much because I can do that here.
Walter.
Just a quick note, I'm pretty sure you meant crypto voxels, not Decentraland.
Voxels, yeah. Ben's work. I can't remember which one it is.
Yeah, so we do actually work with crypto voxels and potentially have grads going there and stuff like that. So yeah, they're not completely invisible. Cool. But I agree with the major. I mean, how crypto voxels as a multi-million-dollar company is practically invisible to MB baffles me.
Yeah, exactly. And because they're not doing the marketing as such, that would put them up in front of it. And Ben's just sort of been working away quietly.
Yeah, they don't have to.
So,
right?
we're back to Darren. And Chris, have you still got your hand up? Or sorry, yeah, that's okay. Darren, back to you, mate.
I was just going to say, that's to close what I said. I think, thanks, Chris, for what you say. You word it so much better than I do. But yeah, I feel confident with Chris in this group that he can help steer it in the, actually get a practical outcome out of this. And that's kind of where, where I sit. I like the academic idea of things, but I've moved away from that myself to like, how do we actually as a country make money out of these things? And I think that's where we fundamentally got to get to. So yeah, thanks, Chris. And yeah, see you guys later. I actually got to run.
Hey, Darren, just stay in for a second, because what I do want to explain, just to contextualize the project as funded by SIFTI, and it's great to see Raywin here from SIFTI, is there is a pure research part to this project, which is funded by SIFTI to do this. but it also has the use cases to explore and be practical and applied as well. And just to sort of give everybody a bit of context where we're at with that, is that, you know, we have the research cases moving along as we start. It's like docking space stations, right? So as we're exploring and in that pure sense, so Chris, I've given you a private message, I will get in touch, but Darren and there's Tim and other people who are here, who do have a digital background, who we are engaged with. We're just going to dock these two space stations together at the same time to really make this of value for everybody and engage the team. Because one of the things that is quite rare, because we've taken this the project in its broader sense, looking at natural products around the world, into the States, into Europe, exploring people who are trying to do something similar. It is a bit of a rare case to have the team we have together, 5 universities and a great advisory board to assist to help steer us in this journey. So yeah, we've got to get it right. But we'll be in touch and are in touch. Darren, thank you for being here and hearing that, and Chris making that really clear. Thank you. So I just wanted to let you know that. I was going to say that towards the end. Oh yeah, and James was saying, as we've explored, as our applications, both to the bill, we've made 3 applications to government. There's no expertise in government. It's very hard to find people to talk to in any meaningful way. So the gap is not the gap we have. There might be multiple space stations which we have to develop. And so we're just really, I think, finishing that initial casing and understanding the wider context of all of this. So yeah, that's just to sort of frame that a little bit of where we're sitting. Okay, right. Steve, is that a comment that you want to talk to that you just wrote there?
No, it's just sort of putting an oar in, but it's reflecting on partly what Robert has just said about his current funding, or the people he currently works with, rather. I have found in the past that, you know, if you put in a research proposal that mentions your crucial researchers from overseas, then there doesn't seem to be a way of handling that, which is certainly for our area, I think, just not acknowledging how the world is these days. And perhaps they need to change that sort of view of things.
Okay.
So in terms of accumulating some takeaways, it sounds a little bit like, one is that we want to have more expertise in government, and 2, we want to have more monies flowing to university to do applied research. Both things sound like very fine objectives. One of the questions I'm still interested in that I've not heard much about, when it comes to the contestability, I'm interested in what people actually think is likely to happen with how this gets achieved for practical use cases. So for example, you know, you're a company using a technology, you don't care about the details of the tech, that's totally fine. Is the appeal of blockchain that you work around government, or is the expectation that blockchain will evolve to end up incorporating government, or is that just irrelevant and you just deal with that as it comes up?
Chris?
The first rule of blockchain is don't mention blockchain to the government.
Why is that though?
Yeah, because look, I'll be brutally honest. I can't use the word blockchain in public.
Sure.
I can't do it. And can I tell you why? Because there is so much, how would I put it? The negativity around that word because of the crypto cowboys and the crypto world.
Okay. Yeah.
And the NFT world means we can't, as an organization, use it.
Talk about the serious stuff, of which there's plenty. Yep.
Yeah. And if you use blockchain with the Crown, who's it you're referring to, they don't want to hear that word.
Okay.
Okay. So because the connotations of it and the public perception of it is not positive, just quietly.
Yeah, that's fine.
I would really urge you to perhaps find another language.
Oh, sure, but we don't even want it. We had blockchain added to our work. We didn't choose blockchain. We don't want the term blockchain. So this is the surprise for us. It's like,
same here.
No, we're not building a blockchain necessarily. It's just a thing.
Yeah. So here's the thing: is it's a tool that we use for certain situations. But what we're trying to do in the Trust Alliance is, as I outlined right at the outset, the key objectives of our organization are that everyone agrees on. Could we use blockchain in some cases? Yes. Will we use it in other cases? No. And you know, that's quite important. My worry is that this use of this word actually doesn't help, just quietly, and because it has negative connotations attached to it. What, for right or wrong reasons, I don't know why, but it causes us more trouble than we really want. I know that you might not want to hear that.
Oh, look, Chris, just to be very clear, the reason we have this webinar, Demystifying Blockchain, is it not right, David, is to actually have this conversation.
Absolutely.
Because every time we went to talk, you might want to just, before we move on to Robert and Walter, David, you may just want to, that's been our experience. As soon as we start
I alluded to that before.
Veracity,
We're interested in some aspects of decentralized integrity, but that doesn't automatically mean that blockchain might be a solution. We don't care. That's the thing which was interesting, is it was then applied to us. Oh, you must be building a blockchain. It's like, well, no, we're not.
Let me give you an idea of the risk. Is I couldn't tweet about this to 4,000 followers. I couldn't tell them I'm in this because of the negative PR around the word blockchain at the moment. Because it's,
so if we called it something else, you might have been able to, Chris. Thanks.
We need a new word.
I'm just being honest with you, because we walk into a wall of resistance, both at central government and in the primary sector. That's the issue that we deal with daily, just quietly, and at a board level.
Thank you. Across to Robert, and then Walter.
Generally, I've found that I often don't have to use the word blockchain or tokens or anything when I'm talking about the technology. The fact that I talk about things like incentive mechanisms, what's going on, how does it lower the transaction costs, how can it improve the efficiency or the veracity of whatever you're trying to do, how do you implement business processes that span multiple organizations, and how can they stand back and trust each other, mutually distrustful in that sense, and what's going on, and then provide lots of examples where that sort of stuff is already done today, and how the sort of institutional arrangements have evolved over time, and really frame that. And so frame the technology in that context. So when I do end up mentioning the term blockchain or tokens or anything else like that, there's usually a stage or context in which they've already understood what's going on, or at least I hope that was the case. And that's why I sort of say, when we talk where I opened up, which was saying that money, its framing as money or digital money, is the wrong narrative. It's the horseless carriage of what we can do with this sort of stuff. Fundamentally, this technology is about cooperation and coordination. That's what it's about. It's effectively just an accounting technology, but this time it's an accounting technology that spans different types of trust boundaries or organizational boundaries. That's all it's doing. And so what is most fascinating to me is when people have got into the blockchain, I'm going, oh, how many times would people get into an accounting information system and try to get really excited about it? Because fundamentally, that's what the blockchain is. Right. And so when I'm talking to people inside of government or into other different organizations, that's the way I frame it. And I have no problem talking about it. And as such, like, as I mentioned earlier, the Ministry of Culture and Heritage has funded a project, and Callaghan has funded projects as well for blockchain related work.
Thank you. Walter, and then David.
Yeah, I want to support parts of what Robert is saying also, and really also just going from those practical examples. And similar to my own practice at the moment, I'm currently consulting on 6 different funded blockchain projects, 4 of which are about Mātauranga Māori and Māori data sovereignty related topics. So I think I again echo Chris's sentiments, but I do wonder though, Chris, like at the moment, to be perfectly honest, like it sounds like your rhetoric is actually the thing that's perpetuating the negative connotation. Because if you, like with some agency on Twitter, apparently, like if guys like you are not going to say like, hey, we're doing this, then your audience is indeed still going to be left in the dark. So, I mean, the public flip on, or the public shift in perception, again, in a global perspective, has already happened. So, yeah, it basically needs all of us to facilitate this in New Zealand as well. And so as a final comment on that note, I do want to say that we need more things like this, like hopefully in the short term, not webinars, but again, physical conferences or exhibitions, meetings, parties, whatever, but at least a broader platform. Because I mean, I'm super interested in some of the people that I've been able to meet today, and I had a similar experience organizing a conference about blockchain things last year, and that has basically, that laid the foundation for most of the work that I'm doing today. So, yeah, I would say more of this, please, with more regularity.
Excellent. David.
Yeah, I think I would agree with getting more work on actual use cases, trying to join up the real world use cases into, where academics are, or that bridging across applied research would be great. One particular interest, for example, and I've not heard anyone really mention it, so I'm going to keep throwing it out there, is this point about contestability. With use cases, how do you recover from failures? What's the threat model? What's the worst thing that can go wrong? How do you get back from that? I'm interested in seeing that sketched out, because it is a necessary pragmatism for applying real things. But I mean, I'm not in the domain where I know exactly what those sorts of situations are going to be. But my actual question was one mostly to Robert, which will seem kind of slightly left field, but I'm just interested, if you had the ability to conjure up a piece of national or government infrastructure that worked and that was created to support blockchain-like systems, would you use one? What would it be?
Well, I'm biased on what would it be at the moment, because my focus is on one particular chain.
Okay.
Like what Chris was talking about, it depends,
yeah.
Right? I very much agree. All software technology are tools, and we can use them in a good way or a bad way. And we can use them in the wrong context or in the right context. The thing is, with most stuff, we have to experiment and try and figure out. And the problem we have at the moment is most people don't know how to use this, how to use this vehicle, this bit of tech that we've got at the moment. And that's because it is fundamentally new. And most of the narratives are couched that currently was in digital money, now decentralized finance, and the
ransomware payments,
those sort of things, stuff like that. Yeah. So as I said, most people aren't thinking in terms of accounting systems or how we actually record events that are occurring or the wider context. And I don't see it as being the only tool in the toolbox that we use. And we've mentioned, for example, the use of external storage. IPFS, for example, being a protocol for accessing that storage. And these technologies, even though they're framed in terms of like being decentralized, are just as useful inside as well as outside an organization. They're just as useful, say, within inside a government versus outside it, because some of the biggest threats from an information security standpoint are insiders. A lot of the financial market regulation occurs because of the principal agent problem, which is we can't trust the agent is working on our behalf, so we've got to do all these sort of disclosure rules and all these sort of things. Well, the technology can come along and help us do that. But is it just a blockchain that does that, as recording the ledger? No, there's a whole lot of other bits and pieces, which Chris has alluded to as well, in terms of like, we've got to have some notion of digital identity. At the moment, most of the blockchains throws their hands up and say, humans, we don't want to deal with you. We'll just give you an identity, which is a cryptographic key, and forget about it. You can create your own public-private key pair, and that's it. Yeah, and that's been a typical remit of the cryptography space over the long time, is the actual end-to-end, i.e. the messy human problem of user experience and managing private keys is too hard, so we won't bother doing that. right? Because ultimately it involves actually bringing on a whole lot of other messy processes that map from the worlds of digital bits into the worlds of messy, wet, wear, and atoms and stuff like that. And so we've got to do a whole lot of that sort of working, which kind of touches on your earlier point about contestability within the law. Now, the way I review a blockchain is, as I've said before, is it just records events. In those cases, those events are generally just pointers or hashes to other things or what's going on. What process it actually encodes or records is completely arbitrary. And this is what we have, these so-called smart contracts that shouldn't be called smart contracts at all, but rather just predicates in terms of, yes, this happened, or yes, this can happen, and that's about it. What they encode, or the steps that they encode, can be contestable. We can do reversibility. The individual events may be immutable, but we can layer over the different sort of processes and stuff that say, well, actually, that event over there is no longer valid now because it's been superseded by this event here. And so we can evolve the information system over time. What it does do is that we've got that record of that evolution, right? We can see that it has evolved, and the current state that it's in is actually the right state. We can go in and view it. And that's the way, so this is a sort of next layer up, right? And it's about effectively the so-called smart contracts are about encoding these practices. So we've now got a general purpose collaborative system, a way of encoding those sort of rules.
Absolutely.
That does not mean that they are contracts in the legal system. It does not mean that they have the ability to put in discretion and that everything should put it in there. But it can lower the cost of maintaining those sort of systems.
That's great.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things which I'm very keen on is people not thinking of them in the legal context, which is, again, one of those points that I think is very important that people understand. But you've already said that, which is music to my ears, thinking about the way in which they can help enact some actions on chain, but they don't replace those systems. I'll be very interested to see how that evolution does integrate systems of law that necessarily become connected to the way that these sorts of issues are resolved. You're muted,
yeah. So that is, again, another sort of area that I'm very interested in. We've done some work in terms of, I started doing a whole lot of work around the data commons work. So I was sort of involved quite heavily in the data commons stuff. And this is where really, how do we actually protect access to information? And so this goes sort of, how do you control access? When can it be used? How can it be used over what sort of time and period and things like that? And fundamentally, the notion of privacy is a social construct. And therefore, there's also a component of reputation involved in it. And we have to have notions of identity in the sense of this is a legal personhood status, those sort of things coming in. But other techniques as well become important, such as the capability stuff. We need to bring back object capabilities, James and David. We need to do that. We've got to bring up new forms of access control, which aren't access control lists, for example. This is really, there's different parts to it, but basically the idea here is that if I'm trying to access someone else's system to pull information, I'm going to be accessing that under some sort of contract. The more I can build that sort of notion of contract or social norm within to the technical systems, the more likely the technical systems are going to correspond or behave in the way that we expect. That is not to say that we should completely rely on these technical systems. We don't, because ultimately it's humans that define value. And we've developed some pretty good systems over a period of time to make society operate. It's not perfect, but can we augment those existing systems and improve the way in which we do them? And which brings back to the point that Chris was really kind of trying to make here, is what can we do to experiment with the idea of applied research, because there are so many different moving parts to this. And really it's kind of like a framing of where we're going from now thinking about, we had computers and we did sort of a few sort of databases and things like that. Then we got the sort of web and the internet, and we started to go e-government and e-systems, and we got SharePoint and stuff like that, which was basically the digitization of paper processes. Now we've got an opportunity to actually come in and do digital native processes and practices that can improve the way we actually work as a society. And that's the sort of thing where the technology like a blockchain and related stuff, and in many respects, some of the Web3 things can actually be really, really useful, right? And indeed, some of James's co-author, who's the OG of sort of Mark Miller in this whole space, has done a lot of work in terms of how do we express rights and computational law through capability-based systems and those sort of things. And that's all really, really important work.
Thank you, Robert. So I'm just conscious of the time. We've got about a quarter of an hour to go. And Walter's got his hand up, but I'm actually, when we do go across to you, Richmond, to talk about the next webinar, perhaps you can start off by just sort of talking about self-exiting and self-emptying as a bit of a prompt for you. But Walter, and then we'll go to Richmond. Walter, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick addition to much of what Robert was just saying, which I largely agree with, but just maybe just to put an additional note on it, to suggest that, like a lot of our discussion today was from a very human-centered perspective. And I think especially when discussing smart contracts, or as I just saw them named in the chat, persistent scripts, or basically any kind of automation at that level, it is good to emphasize that this is really mostly about machine-to-machine communication, and about, again, like the transactional nature of the objects that are being transferred. And yeah, so I just wanted to mention that blockchain combined with machine learning already today, for example, yeah, largely doesn't really need humans to complete its goals, obviously.
Okay, thank you, Walter. So we're just going to start to wind up here now. Robert, you want to write a response to that? That's good. So I'll go back to you, Robert, before we go to Richmond.
Just really quickly about that idea of machine-to-machine communication and stuff. I would like to just put one thing out there. A lot of people are hating upon cryptocurrencies and NFTs, and there's a speculative component. And I've mentioned earlier that speculation in terms of financial capital speculation is important for technology, for it to evolve. If it wasn't there, this stuff wouldn't be built on. And in fact, over the last 10 years, a huge amount of really, really interesting stuff has been worked on. For example, there's a big rise now in the area of formal proofs, or formal methods being used quite a lot now, because essentially smart contracts were being developed that people were losing a lot of capital or wealth value on. And so all of a sudden, formal methods become really, really important. Something I never expected to see in terms of mainstream adoption and anything else like that, though I'm absolutely delighted. Likewise, with the technologies like the zero knowledge technologies for cryptography, they'd been sitting around for a long, long time. In fact, the original work came out of David Charm's work in the 80s. And then Stefan Brans came through and did a whole lot of work on that. And they were talked about for ages, but now all of a sudden there's a huge amount of work going into them because of the financial speculation. That's a good thing, because that gives us more robust technologies overall and what we can do and use. And in addition to that, I'd also say this, is there's a real misperception about what markets are. And markets are basically an information processing system. At the moment, we've been given two options around how to actually organize society. One was government or a bureaucracy, companies, those sort of things that end up with the top of the hierarchy making decisions for us and directing us what to do. The other, at the polar extreme, was basically the idea of financial markets, where independent so-called rational actors could go and process information and decide what they're doing. Both are computational systems. They're processing information about society, where to allocate resources, the best appropriate way to do that. What is demonstrating here is now that we can actually do a lot of this stuff really, really efficiently with machines can do that. And that actually brings us the spectre to come together, which is why I've used the word like data commons and the commons, and I talk about the idea of public and common goods a lot. It's because now we can actually meet in the middle. We can take the work of Eleanor Ostrom and all these institutional economists and say, hey, actually, we can now solve problems that are in common and public goods that were really, really difficult to solve before, and we needed a government. That, to me, is quite interesting.
It is, although there's still the cybercrime aspect, which is difficult. So the inefficiencies of those systems can still be a big challenge that's worth looking at, because criminals can afford to put in more money than they take out, and it's of value to them.
Okay, David, hold that thought, because what I'm going to do is slip across to Richmond now. And what we will do, and we'll give a chance for each of the presenters tonight, Robert, David, Walter, and Chris. So I'm going to change it up slightly. We're going to go to Richmond, and I'm just going to do a little spiel to talk about what next for Veracity. And then I'm going to give each of you maybe just 2 minutes to conclude off your thoughts for today. And we'll go from Robert to David to Walter to Chris. So the next couple of minutes when Richmond and myself are talking, a chance for you all just to sort of think about what your concluding remarks will be. Great pleasure to introduce you all to Richmond. Richmond's on our advisory board, but Richmond, please introduce yourself and tell us what's happening next in our webinar series.
Cool. Kia ora and greetings to all. Can you hear me all right? Yep. Brendan? Yep, cool. Yeah, I suppose this is the entertainment break. Not quite. Looking ahead. I'm Richmond Wee, one of the advisory members to the Veracity Lab. My work is focused on the legal, regulatory, policy, and ethical aspects of new and emerging technology, or technologies in the plural. I'm currently based at Te Piringa, Faculty of Law, Waikato University, for a Law Foundation project to build legal capability for digital tech across all law faculties in schools, particularly the undergrad program. Chris, you meant Friday, if you think there is a problem in your area, I think there's a bigger problem, maybe even greater challenges here at the across the law faculties and schools. But anyway, I also teach through VIC to their postgraduate bioethics and health research students, formerly based at Otago with the multidisciplinary and international genomics project that was led by their law faculty. Currently as well, I'm connected with Waikato University through the Amiomio project, looking at the circular economy for New Zealand. Quite a few change of gears there. But yeah, thank you very much for to all for your contributions for the webinar today. I found the discussions very interesting and indeed enlightening. Thanks very much also to all of those who logged in. Some very familiar faces and voices here, people I've bumped into over the years. Listening to the webinar in the past hour or so, I have a very specific and practical question. What can Veracity do with the input of all of us here, up to 30 folks at one stage, now 18? Something I suppose I might look at exploring in the next webinar. I'm anticipating the next webinar to be in a month's time on the last Wednesday of April. The role has been assigned to me to help arrange a panel discussion on rules as code, or in its other formulation and with slightly different nuances in meaning better rules or legislation as code. On behalf of Veracity Lab, particularly on behalf of Marcus and Brendan, may I say that we would like to crowdsource or group source the knowledge, experience, and interest of attendees here today, or those who should be here, in which case, please spread the word when the publicity goes out. If you have any suggestions about the particular aspect of rules as code that should be covered for next month's webinar, please get in touch with me. My email is this one here. Yep, that came through. If you wish to present some ideas or important material, please get in touch so that we can cover your interest and information you have for the upcoming webinar. I'm still shaping it up, but on my part, I'd like to see what I'd like to see covered for the webinar is not just the background information and details or current developments on the thinking of rules as code, but I intend to point out some of the things that have been done in this country to date, and for a purposeful and focused webinar looking ahead, collaborate on doing stuff as the next steps for initiatives on rules as code. Chris Claridge's comment about, please let's move towards execution and implementation, towards the experimental and the actual, go out and do stuff. That's what I'm really keen to see done. I mean, and perhaps there's an idea there. I'll discuss it next week or next month about setting up a multi-stakeholder collaborative initiative on actually doing stuff. I think there's been enough talk, there's been enough theory, and people can go and read it, but it is about the doing and just trying it out. The Veracity Lab, particularly Brendan, will be in touch with more details when we've got the information finalized. Thank you.
Excellent, Richmond. Thank you so much. Great to have you on and work with that. And one of the things really, and I think one of the things that have come out for me very strongly is the need to move into the applied cycle and the action research piece. We need to actually test, fail, redesign, reapply, find good solutions. That is what we are about. And but what I just want to add to everybody before we move to conclude is Veracity Lab has not been able to get together as one unit because of COVID. So for the 6+ months we've been going, we haven't been able to physically get together. We're not alone in that field. And but one of the things we are looking at doing is having a launch/conference, and that's been discussed as a positive thing. I think it was Darren was talking about. There's a need, there's a thirst for these types of very practical and applied technical research practitioners to come together, and that is what these webinars will be. Richmond will be leading the next one, but there's a conference we're looking at around September. I don't want to push or rush it. We've got to get it right, and I think really finding a nice place and an environment to create that with the community is going to be very important. So again, I'll be reaching out for people as we start to get a bit of shape around that. And that should give us a chance to actually feedback in those action cycles about what we're doing and express other avenues of that. So in a way, just a question to everybody before we move into the conclusions. The format of this webinar, how's that been? Has it worked for everyone? You could just give a thumbs up or a up or down or something like that. I mean, is this the sort of format that works? Quite
I've got vested interests.
Yeah, someone's given a bit of a thumbs up. I think it's been quite useful in terms of it's been quite dynamic and allows people to carry on with, and the time's good, it's 5 to 7. Is that a good time? Is the timing good? I'll take that as a yes too. Okay, could be better. But right, so as we move to conclude, we're going to start with Robert and your concluding remarks, Robert, and you've got 2 minutes. You don't have to use them all.
my concluding remarks. What is it? I don't know. This is a really fascinating area of technology because it is situated in the social, that intersection of social technology. Rohit Khan many years ago said that there was many layers to the technology stack. We started off at the data layer and the standard sort of OSI model of networking, data layer, the application layer and stuff. And what he said was always that there was also the economic and the political. And I see this technology, the blockchain technology, because it's dealing with the accounting sort of framework, and fundamentally accounting rules the world, whether you like it or not. If you want to change the world, change the accounting model, right? So the next layer up is basically the economic layer, and that's where the blockchain technology sits. right? It's at the economic layer. It's about doing incentives. It's about designing, accounting for contributions, all those sorts of things. And as a result of that, that will have a direct impact at the political layer. And I think that's really, really interesting. And it's a cross-disciplinary, or more specifically, anti-disciplinary type of technology. Go outside of your disciplines and explore different domains, because it crosses a whole lot of them. This is about how digital technology impacts society. And that is interesting. And out of that, you'll get, whether you're using a blockchain or not, you'll get some interesting results.
Thank you, Robert. David.
Thanks. So thoroughly thought-provoking is the way I'd put it. It's particularly regarding a lot of the Veracity Lab priorities and opportunities that we can take from everyone here. I'm really comfortable that those in the room are leading New Zealand forwards in this space, even if we have hurdles that we need to overcome. And that's been really a positive experience for me participating. I still want to get some aspects of my externality cost estimations included in rant about risks of open blockchains and stuff, since I think it scopes the net positive possibilities. However, I'm extremely keen to kind of look to form a combined fund for the benefit of Aotearoa in terms of moving this forwards and trying to tackle some of those takeaways, the new word for blockchain because of the negative connotations, the expertise in government, and also, of course, more university money.
Excellent. Walter.
Okay, so putting my combined artist, activist, academic hat on, I will pose my final 2 minutes as a provocation. So yeah, I would like to state that, again, similar to earlier comments, like with Veracity Lab's focus on primary industries and some of those current engagements, I would like to suggest that possibly even already today, if an organization such as Trust Alliance would come up with a correct use case for blockchain technology, then I'm pretty confident that we could deliver that already with existing capability. But I think the real challenge for Aotearoa New Zealand lies in recognizing this new primary industry, which again is like consists of digitally networked global cultural production. And I think also that is essentially what we should focus on, with support from, again, relevant ministries and funding bodies and so forth. And really also focusing on new types of cultural products. So not so much digitization of taonga and old heritage type things, but also really understanding new things coming out of the field of media arts and computational design.
And Chris.
Kia ora. We're in an interesting point in history. We're quite isolated. We're really struggling to connect with the rest of the world with regards to trade. We do have the ability to connect digitally, to Walter's comment. So the ability to build digital capacity in arts and culture absolutely got me a hello on that one. However, I've got to speak on behalf of the primary sector, which is it's the organisation that we're leading. We absolutely need our research community and the wider research community to stand up and acknowledge and to help us. We're seeing a green paper, and David will understand exactly what I'm talking about. There's a change in research funding happening. The CRI model is under challenge and will not survive, in my view. So that leaves enormous potential for collaborative research rather than the current neoliberal research funding model that we have, which is patently not working for us in the primary sector. So therefore, we're looking to the researchers at the universities, because what you're talking about here doesn't exist in the CRIs. It's not there. So we have a problem in terms of application of these types of technologies to the primary sector. The business case uses are there. We know exactly what the problems are and we don't necessarily know how to solve them. but we know that the cost of compliance of data requirements from the primary sector is crippling them. 500 to 1,000 hours per farm to produce the data that's required by central and local government for compliance. It's killing us. Farmers are going broke because of COVID, because of international trade, and because of compliance costs. We see digitization of the primary sector as absolutely key to stripping away compliance and taking compliance cost into value. And we see this technology, Web 3.0 and associated technologies, as critical to it. We need help.
Excellent. Right, thank you very much to everybody. That's been great, and we've had some late arrivals as well. But I found that very inspiring, and I found it highly collaborative. And I just want to thank Matthias for helping us at the back end, making sure we're all admitted and looking after ourselves, and particularly to Robert, David, Walter, and Chris for your energy that you've given us. And it's been really thought-provoking, and it's, for me, endless learning, and I'm really enjoying that and the challenges that it faces. And I do feel really confident, because one of the things that New Zealand is small and not very complicated, actually, as a politically or in any particular way. We're quite simple. So I've emailed people we're going to be reaching out for. People have come back interested in the conference and other aspects of what we could be doing. Richmond's going to be in touch regarding, well, we'll be in touch, Veracity Lab, about the next webinar. And I just wish everybody a very good night, and thank you for your attendance, and enjoy your evening with your families. Take very good care.